also a lot of because we're starting to see now this new influx of fighters and a lot of this previous generation, which we need to figure out a name for, you know what I mean, are starting to go out a little bit, you know, a lot more fighters now that we used to grow up on and now like starting to retire or starting to leave or starting to have their last run. Like we grew up on the we grew up on the Overeems, you know, we grew up on Teixeiras and Silva, you know, all that era is starting to go out a little bit, you know what I mean?
It is a shame because I mean that's a perfect segue into Carlos Condit versus Matt Brown.
Yeah.
I mean, those guys have been in the UFC for such a fucking long time. I mean, we all talked about Diego Sanchez last week.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about that, Kenny Florian was on the same season of the Ultimate Fighter, right? Kenny hasn't fought in so long. I mean, he's fought at all different weight classes, 145, 155, etc. But he's now a commentator and he's been doing that and a broadcaster for such a long period of time, right? Diego's still fighting. We just had Carlos Condit versus Matt Brown, which is most likely going to be it's most likely Matt Brown's last fight. Unfortunately, Matt Brown lost to Carlos Condit. Carlos Condit, I just banked on Carlos winning.
Yeah.
I knew he was going to win because whenever you see Matt Brown fight, you always see he really struggles with body shots. There seems to be some issue with his abdomen because when he gets hit with those, it's such an overreaction. And I'm not saying he's acting. I'm saying like something's not normal with his abdomen because he can't absorb the same body shots anymore. And I feel like, I mean, Carlos Condit is an absolute killer, an absolute stud. Did you know the story about Carlos Condit? So these UFC fighters, I don't know if you know this actually, but these UFC fighters were invited to hang out with the army. So I think they went to Afghanistan or some shit to just hang out with the army and that and just show them some stuff and basically just have like a nice
seminar slash
like just skills and training and things like that.
Workshop.
Like a workshop, right? And then I mean Carlos Condit gets in the ring with one of these soldiers and the soldier says, "Oh, how hard do you want to go?" And Condit says, as hard as you want to get hit. I'll hit you just as hard as you hit me. He was like, right, okay. And the soldier just turned it up and just tried to knock Carlos out. Just like any person, if they were to stroll into in a gym and the fight a UFC fighter, they want to fuck that fighter up because there's a huge feather in their cap, right? It's not a good thing. It's a shitty sparring partner.
Mm-hmm.
But
and it's cost a few fighters as well.
It costs a lot of fight. It costs them the chin.
Yeah.
Having these gym wars. But Carlos Condit gets smacked and he goes boom. And he flicks it like a switch, knocks that soldier out, knocks him out in the ring. It's just funny because when I think of a fighter, I do think of the Carlos Condits. You know, he's fought GSP. He's fought so many people.
Highlight knockout. But both had highlight knockouts. Like Carlos Condit, he had that knockout over Dan Hardy. Just like when there was that left hand, it just like sent him flying backwards. And then also you got Matt Brown's probably one of the best elbows ever when he grabbed Diego Sanchez's right leg and just boom and just smashed him right across with the elbow. And then Diego Sanchez just hit the canvas like a sack of potatoes. His whole body just went limp.
Exactly. And
so it was, but one thing I was quite proud of that they're very seasoned. And watching very seasoned fighters like go at each other, it's a nice thing to watch. But how much is, too much, you know what I mean?
They've been fighting for such a long time. I think Matt Brown should retire. I think he's been fighting for I believe he has either number one or number two. He's either the number one or number two spot for most fights in the UFC.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Not most wins, but the most fights in the UFC, I'm pretty sure. And I think most wins is Cerrone.
Yeah.
At least Cerrone. Or Matt Brown might be paired with Cerrone for number one or number two spot.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why Matt Brown's still going is that he actually credits a lot of his strength conditioning to Louis Simmons. So there's this really good documentary where Matt Brown tells this amazing story. The documentary is called West Side versus the World, where Matt Brown tells him, because Louis Simmons was a massive fan of fighting.
This is where West Side Barbell, yeah?
Yeah, in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
And what happened was Matt Brown says there was a point where he was having back issues, and then he went to Louis Simmons because he invented the reverse hyperextension, which is a machine.
Really, really good machine.
It was a good machine. And then he also worked a lot with like NFL players and basketball players and fighters and all that. And then Matt Brown heard about him and he went to him, and then he told the story that he walked in on his morning crew, I think, or his night crew, and they were doing a deadlifting session. And Louis Simmons was in his like 50s at the time or 60s at the time. And he had just suffered from like knee problems and back problems, and he had a throat and all that. And he was telling a story of how he just had his knee scoped, and then he walked in and he was doing a deadlift session, and then there was just blood pouring out of his knee and just blood pouring out of his eyes and his nose and all that because they were all maxing out and all. And then he just walked in there, and Louis Simmons just saw him, and he walked right up to him, wiped the blood from his face, and then with the same hand with the blood on it, he just says, "Matt Brown, big fan, love to have you in here." And then Matt's just like, I was so disgusted, but I was so impressed. And then he started training with him ever since. You know what I mean?
What a quote. I was so disgusted, but I was so impressed.
Yeah. Well, it's because like you wouldn't expect that from like a 60-something-year-old man, would you?
No. And most likely the reason why that these fighters are still around is probably really good strength and conditioning. We always see Matt Brown and Carlos Condit tend to be in very good condition. I mean, it's most likely the last fight for both fighters. I think Carlos Condit probably has maybe 1 or 2 more fights left in him. I mean, he only fought 3 months ago, and now he fought Matt Brown today. But I think that was Matt Brown's last fight. Realistically, with the cuts that they're doing, I think he's on the chopping block now.